Hi everyone. I had to shoot some intros for the Fault Line Film Festival down here in Rose Theater, so I decided I'd go ahead and shoot a few intros for our editing demonstrations that we'll be doing in class. Now I know this is going to be a little tricky for us because all of you might be using different platforms to work on. I know we were planning on using Avid for this class, but maybe some of you don't have access to that. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show you how to use Avid, but hopefully in the process of showing you how to use Avid, you'll also learn just the basic skills you need to know for any editing system. Hopefully you'll be able to download that free version of Avid, but if not, you can still follow along and just kind of watch what we're doing with this program. In MC 352 next semester in the fall, we'll spend more time getting you caught up on Avid. So at least this way, you'll get a chance to get exposed to the program so it won't be so foreign to you when we come back in the fall. And we're going to kind of break it up into 3 sessions. This first session, I'm just going to start talking about kind of the interface and then just the basic editing tools we use for video. So this will be lesson 1, kind of introduction, basic editing tools. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to be working with our version of Avid Media Composer. It will look a little different than the one that you've downloaded for free if you do have Avid on your computer, but a lot of the functions are still going to be the same. It just might look a little different. So we're going to begin by starting a new project, and for the free version you won't have many options at all. As far as creating new projects, you probably won't have a lot of choices to make. But let's start by clicking on a new project button. And what you'll want to do, I'm just going to call this MC351. And you'll want to look at these choices for format. Now on our version of Avid, we have a lot of different choices for formats. You'll just want to think about what resolution and frame rate you shot your video in, and that will help determine what format you want to create for your project. So just make sure the format of the project creates the format, matches the format of the video footage you've got. I'm going to assume that most of you are shooting maybe some kind of HD, either 1080 or 720. And usually the frame rate is around 30, which that is actually going to be 2997. So that might be a standard resolution that we would work with. So I'll hit OK. And then the project would open up. And then once we're inside the project, you'll see all the different workspace. Now I'm going to close this one because I have another project that has some actual footage in it. I just wanted to show you how to start a new project. Okay, so we're into another project here. And we're going to walk through just some of the different workspace. And today I'm going to show you some of the basic editing tools as well. So we'll start with this window right here. Okay, this window is the project window. Now on your Media Composer First program, if you have that on your Mac, it'll probably still be up in this same location. It'll just look a little different, and it won't have a lot of these different tabs that you see on my screen. But we'll have a place right here called bins. These are where we store our footage. So you have bins located right here. Now for you to create new bins, you'll see something that kind of looks like this. It's called a fast menu. I think on your version it would be in the top right corner. So if you want to create new bins, you can click on that and it will give you the option. For me, if I want to click on a new bin, I just find the button right there and I can start a new bin. Now, whenever it comes to creating bins, you can decide how detailed you want to get with this. Maybe you want to organize your bins based on scene number. Maybe you have a really simple project and you simply want to have one bin for video, one bin for audio. Doesn't matter, but just try to come up with some system that makes sense for organizing your footage. Okay, so once we have bins created, we can start putting footage into those bins. And in Avid, we call those clips. Now, there are a couple different ways we can get footage into my version of Avid. With your version, it's going to be probably just one choice. I'll start with the version that I'm working with. What I did right here, I just right-clicked inside of the bin, and that gives me this little menu that allows me to input. Now I'm going to start with this one called Import Media. Okay, with this, I can simply locate the clip that I want. It will import that into my project. And then there's the clip that I just imported right here. This is nice because it's a stable way to get footage into your project because you're not reliant on having the source of the media always with you, like an SD card or something like that. Okay, I'm going to delete that real quick. Now the way that you're going to have to import footage if you're using the Avid version, the free version at home, you'll do the same thing with this input, but instead of input media, your only option is going to be source browser. Source browser is great because it lets you quickly link clips into your project. So that clip that I just imported was located on my F drive, and you just have to navigate to where that clip is located. And then once you find it, you'll just click on it. Make sure the target bin right here is the one you want to send it to, and then click link. I'm going to minimize this. If I look up here in my bin, there's the same clip again. I just linked it instead of importing it. Now, the only downside with this, you do need to have whatever source you got this footage from plugged into your computer. So if it's on an SD card or a hard drive, it's got to be accessible. And then sometimes with bigger projects, larger files, these linked clips can kind of lag a little bit, so that might be another issue. But for the most part, it should work pretty clean. Okay, I'm going to delete that. All I'm doing to delete this, I click on the clip I want to get rid of, and I hit the delete key on my keyboard. Okay, so we're inside our bin. Let's start looking at some of these clips. Okay, so I'm going to open up a clip, and notice these little icons next to the name. You'll want to double click on that to open up the clip and be able to watch it. This window right here, this is called the composer window. Now all the footage we see on this side, if we ever see images on this side, the left, this is our source side. So footage that we want to put into our movie, we'll first watch it right here. Now once I get something loaded into the composer window, I got this little blue bar down here that I can use to navigate through just by dragging it. I can also hit the space bar to stop and start the footage. There's also some shortcut keys on your keyboard that will play it forwards or backwards. If you hit the letter L, the L key, that will play it. And if you hit the L key again and again and again, it will go faster. If you hit the J key, you can play it backwards, and the same thing, you can hit that several times to make it go faster. And then the K button will just freeze or stop the footage. So sometimes if you're navigating quickly through footage, it might be a fast way to navigate through using those J, K, and L keys. But otherwise, spacebar is great if you just want to simply stop and start your footage. Okay, so let's say we have this clip that we want to edit into our project. Okay, what we want to do is determine where we want that clip to start and where we want it to end. And that's called in and out points. Now, whenever you first start editing, you kind of want to leave those in and out points loose. You don't want to cut off too much. Like, for example, in this shot, I would probably set an initial endpoint right after that clapboard gets pulled out. And I would find my very first usable frame of footage. And I'd set an endpoint right there. Now, the way I set an endpoint on my keyboard, I simply hit the letter I. Just think I for in and O for out. So that just set an out point. Now, if you can't remember I and O, these little icons right here on the composer window will do the same thing. And if I set one out point, but I want to reset it, all you have to do is just click on the out point again or hit the O button again to set a new out point or end point. Now, for me, I'm going to cut it a little tighter today just because we're going to try to look at some things in a little more detail. So I'll set an end point right before she opens the door here. And I'll set an out point as she starts playing around with these things on the desk. Okay, I have an in and out point set for my clip here in the composer window. So now I need to get this down here to my timeline. Okay, the way we get things down on the timeline, you can simply drag this down, but I find that sometimes when you start dragging footage down to the timeline, it gets kind of sloppy. You're not setting real clean in and out points, and sometimes it just wants to drag the whole shot down. I like to use the edit buttons instead. Now on the Avid, there are two buttons that we can use for edits. We've got the letter V, that's something called a splice edit, and the letter B, that's something called an overwrite edit. You'll also see those buttons probably located on your composer window, with the yellow button meaning splice, the red meaning overwrite. Now, right now we have nothing on our timeline, so it really doesn't matter. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit the letter V, the splice button, to get it on my timeline. Okay, let's take a look at this. Once we put this shot onto the timeline, that kind of brought some other things to life. We now see our timeline and we see the different tracks on our timeline. Right now I currently have a V1 track, that's our video track. And then I have two audio tracks, A1 and A2. The reason why I have two audio tracks is because this is stereo sound and I've separated out those two channels of audio on my timeline. We also might have noticed some action happening up here. This is our composer window record side or output side. So this is showing what's on our timeline right here. You might also see a little indicator up here that lets us know the name of this sequence that we're creating. In Avid, anytime we're creating a movie on the timeline, it is referred to as a sequence. Right now it says Untitled Sequence 01. If we go back to our bin, you should find that sequence there, and you might notice the icon for the sequence looks different than the icon for a clip. So I'm going to go ahead and rename that. The name of this movie is Wanna Trade, so I'll just call it Wanna Trade. So I just renamed that sequence. That changed the name of it up here in the composer window. It's a good idea to name your sequences because if you keep creating new timelines and if you have a bunch of timelines that are just simply called untitled, it's going to get confusing and you're not going to know what you're trying to work with. Okay, so I have the start of my sequence. Let's say I want to start adding more clips to my timeline. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open up another clip. And maybe it's something like this, with her looking at the table and then turning. Okay, so I set another in and out point. Now once we want to start adding new clips to our timeline, it becomes important where we put that new clip. This blue bar that you see me moving around right here determines where this shot is going to go. Now if you have a keyboard with a home and end key on it, then you can use those keys to take the blue bar to the beginning, that's home, or to the end, which is the end key. But if you don't have that, just simply drag that blue bar until it cannot move anymore, and you'll know that it's at the end of your timeline. And that's where we want to add this new clip, at the end of our timeline. Okay, so I have this clip I want to edit in. I'm going to do another splice. That's the letter V on your keyboard. And that added that shot right behind the other shot. And we can kind of work on this edit here in a minute to clean it up. Now if you're using some other editing system, a lot of the keys are going to be different, but the process is the same, right? We're trying to get our clips onto a timeline in order, and we're going to be cutting out things that we don't want to keep and trying to make the cuts between each shot seamless. And there are different techniques, of course, that are going to help us do that. Okay, so that's shot 2. Let's say that I wanted to put a shot in between these 2 shots. Okay, I'm going to open up something called Kate's Hands Face CU. And this shows a detail of her kind of looking around at stuff on this desk. And let's say maybe I want to show that instead. So I'll put an in and out point here of her kind of digging around. And what I want to do is I want to put that in between these 2 shots. Okay, this is when it matters if we're doing a splice or an overwrite edit. Okay, first I need to get my blue bar exactly in between these 2 shots. Now I could just drag it and eyeball it and hope for the best, but to make sure that this blue bar goes exactly in between these 2 shots, I'm going to hold down the Control key. If you're using the Mac, that's going to be your Command key. Hold down Control, click near the edit, and that's going to snap that blue bar right in between those 2 shots. This is something you're going to use all the time because you typically want to have edits occur on edit points. So you'll want to ensure that that blue bar gets exactly where it needs to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and do an edit here. Now we're going to do it 2 different ways. We're going to do first a splice edit and an overwrite edit. Actually, I'm going to reverse that. I'll show you the wrong way first. So we'll do an overwrite edit first. Now, it's going to be, for you, the red arrow that you see here that says overwrite. Or if you want to use the keyboard shortcut, it's the letter B as in boy. So here I am going to overwrite. And I know you probably didn't notice what happened, but probably on your, if you're working along, you might have seen that what this did, it added this new shot right here, but it went over the top of this existing shot and erased what was there. So before I had Kate kind of leaned over the desk, but it erased all of that because this overwrote what was there. Okay, let's say I don't want that. What I wanted to happen is have this shot be inserted here, but still keep all of this. I just wanted to push all of this down the timeline. Okay, that would be a splice edit. So if I hit the letter V instead of B, that's a splice edit. And you can see this time it added the shot and pushed the other shot down. This is definitely going to be a more common edit that you use. Typically when you add things to the timeline, you want to keep everything else as it is on the timeline, and therefore you're going to splice to move all that stuff down. Just a few things here as we've got some action on the timeline that I want to show you. There is a focus button that lets us zoom in to our timeline. Now, if you're using the Avid version I have here in the lab, there's a shortcut key, the letter H, that will zoom in and out. But I don't think that works for the version you have on your Mac. So you might need to look at the bottom of your timeline, and you'll see this little kind of target button. That's going to focus in. Now that's going to be handy whenever you get a really big timeline going and you need to kind of examine and edit. So you can use that focus button to zoom in and see some detail of what you want to do. You can also scale your timeline just by grabbing this bar down here at the bottom of your timeline to kind of zoom in on things, and then scroll through different sections using this bar right here. And if you just want to go back to your normal full timeline, just drag it all the way back to the left again. Also on the timeline, you might notice there's lots of different controls. We won't dig into a lot of these because I know some of you might be looking at different editing systems, but there are a lot of different controls and tools located on the timeline itself. They're going to help you with different edits. I'm not sure on your version if you see this, but there is a VU meter that's built into the Avid timeline that kind of shows you sound levels as we're navigating through. And then we'll do a whole lab on sound editing so I can show you more about how all that works. Just a few other details before we start doing some more editing. Up here in the Composer window, you'll see some information up here at the top. This is just information related to the sequence itself, the duration of it, and all that. If you click on the other side, this shows you the duration of the clip and in and out points and all that. Every now and then you can find some useful information up here that relates to your project that you might need to access. Okay, so we did a couple basic edits here. We did a splice, we did an overwrite. Okay, let's start doing maybe a few more complex things. You might see, I think on your version of Avid, you're going to see up here, you're going to see a yellow and red arrow. It's kind of this split arrow. And if you put your cursor over the top of it, it's going to say segment mode. Now mine are located over here on this side, but I think yours are located on the top. Okay, segment mode allows us to rearrange clips that are already on the timeline. So let's say I want to move this clip this way or this way. I can use segment mode to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Now, whenever you turn yours on, if you're using the Mac free version, it's only going to have one choice. And what's going to happen is you're going to bring your cursor to the timeline, and if you hold it toward the top of a clip, it will turn red, and at the bottom it will turn yellow. You're going to almost always want that yellow arrow. So try to make sure that yellow arrow is showing whenever you click on a clip to be moved. So I got my yellow segment arrow working right now, and I just clicked on this clip right here. This is the one I want to move. Let's say I want to move this to the beginning of my timeline. I'll simply start dragging it. Whoops, I'll undo that. And you can see it moving here. And let's say I want to have it go to the very beginning. I'm going to hold down the control key. And notice when I'm holding the control key, it wants to snap to edit points, which is useful. So what I did, I took that shot moved it to the beginning, everything else got pushed down, it filled in that hole that I had. That's what I wanted. Okay, I'm going to undo that. And by the way, to undo something, this is a very useful shortcut to know. Let's say you make a mistake and you don't know how to get rid of that mistake. Just hit Control Z or Command Z, and that will undo what you just did. I always recommend if you make a mistake, try not to further damage it by doing other things to try to fix it. Just simply stop, Control Z, get back to where you were, and then you can kind of figure out how to fix the problem from there. Another thing, another good habit to get into is to save your project often. You never know when systems can crash. So what you want to do to save everything, here's a shortcut. Just make sure your project window is selected, that it's the active window. And then hit Control S or Command S, and that will save everything in every bin, in every window. I try to get in the habit of doing that every 5-10 minutes just to be safe, just to make sure nothing gets lost. I'm going to show you that red arrow real quick. If I move something using the red arrow, you can see what happens. It leaves a hole where that clip once was, and it erases whatever I put it down onto. So this is one you probably don't want to use so much. So I'm going to undo that. So whenever you're working with segment mode, it's almost always going to be that yellow arrow segment mode to move things around. Okay, sometimes when you get stuff on a timeline, you might also want to get rid of it. And there's some different ways we can get rid of things on a timeline. We can use segment mode to delete things from a timeline by clicking on it and then hitting the delete button. Now this is a little weird sometimes, especially on the system I have here. Maybe it's not the same way on your system. But for me, when I do this, I click on it once and I hit delete once. The first time I hit delete, it won't get rid of it. But the second time I click on it and hit delete, it will. And the reason why it does it on my system, sometimes you can use segment mode to get rid of any effects or changes you made to a clip. So the first time you hit delete, it's getting rid of any modifications to that clip. The second time you hit delete, it gets rid of the clip entirely. Okay, I know that sounds confusing, so I'm going to show you another way that maybe is a little easier to use to delete clips. And that's simply by marking a clip on your timeline and then getting rid of it after you mark it. So to mark something on the timeline, look at the letter T on your keyboard. Okay, the letter T on the keyboard is a shortcut for marking a clip. Now you might see this little icon on your timeline toolbar somewhere that looks like an in and out point right next to each other. Okay, that's going to do the same thing. But the shortcut for this is the letter T. When I hit the letter T, notice what happens. It highlights that clip, and it also puts an in point and an out point right here on my timeline. Okay, once I have this clip marked, I can then lift or extract it. Now, for you, you might see these icons that look like this, a little yellow arrow going up or a little red arrow going up. Red's lift, yellow's extract. If you want to know the shortcut, X is extract, Z is lift. I'm going to first extract it. That's the letter X. That took out the clip, pushed everything else down, filled up the hole. Okay, I'm going to undo that. This time I'm going to lift it out. That time it took out the shot, but it left the hole where that shot once was, and it's still marked. If you're using different editing systems, you probably have similar tools that will do this same thing. I would say probably extracting is something you'll use a lot more than lifting. And the same thing with segment mode. I think you probably will find similar tools on whatever editing system you're using, but you'll probably use the one that's more of the splice version where you're moving things around and it rearranges and doesn't leave holes. Okay, I'm going to unmark this. If I'm looking at my keyboard, it's the letter G. The letter G will get rid of any marks that you've placed on your timeline. Okay, let's do another thing. Let's say I've got this edit right here, and I want to match the action of her reaching for those papers with this close-up shot of her doing that. And maybe you could even do it on this back end too. Now these actually look pretty decent, but I'm going to go in a little bit more detailed and examine this edit. Okay, so whenever you're doing what we call kind of a fine cut, when you're really examining every frame of your timeline, you probably want to start using a tool called trim mode. Trim mode allows us to go in and really analyze each frame and add and cut out frames as needed. Now there's a shortcut key that gets us into it. The letter U will take us into trim mode. If you're using the free version of Avid, you're probably going to see a tool up here that probably says something like ripple trim or something like that. That will also help you get into that tool. But you might notice whenever we get into trim mode, some things have changed. Okay, the composer window is now different. We're now seeing the end, we call this the tail of shot A. Okay, that's the shot right here down the timeline. And we see the head, the first frame of shot B. That's the one that's kind of connected to it. So this is the two frames that are edited next to each other. You might see these little purple zeros here. I'm not sure what color they're going to be on your version. You might see these little purple bars or some other colored bars down here on the timeline itself. These are called rollers. Okay, these allow us to manipulate this edit. Now I'm going to come down here and I'll show you something. If you take your cursor down to the timeline and put it right up next to the roller, you should see this little icon that's the trim mode icon, and it kind of looks like a little film frame. And if I click and drag, notice I can move this thing left and right, and if I move it one direction, it's going to be adding frames to shot B and taking away frames from shot A. And if I go this other direction, it's going to be adding to A and taking away from B. Now, that's fine, but typically whenever you do trim mode, you don't want to work this way. You want to work more on one side at a time. That's the easier way to work. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get out of this, what's called dual roller trim mode, and get into something called single roller trim mode, where I'm just working on one side at a time. So right here, let's say I want to work on, let's maybe work on this side, because I've got her reaching for the paper right here. I want her to grab that paper, kind of match it with what's happening here, and see how her hands are down at the bottom of the desk here, top of the desk right there. So I need to fix this. So I clicked on this side to turn it on and turn this off. Now I only have one roller down here, and it probably changed color for you. Mine's yellow. And this one got turned off too. And if I start dragging this, see what's happening here? I can kind of look at what's happening in this shot, the tail, and try to match her hand to what's going on right here. And let's say I want to take a look at it. I'll hit the space bar to watch that edit, and you can see how that edit matches now. I'll show it to you again. You can see the matching action cut, and we talked about this in the lecture, right? Where we're trying to match the action from one angle to what's happening in a different angle. So trim mode is great for this, for going on in and cleaning up edits, matching them from one side to the next side. Okay, once you have the edit done the way you want it and you want to get out of trim mode, just simply hit that U button again, or click on that little icon that was up here for you. Over here I've got different trim buttons on the timeline, and you probably have something similar on your timeline to take you in and out of that trim mode. Okay, so I'm going to save everything I've done, and I'm going to keep it kind of simple today, so I won't show you any other basic video editing tools, but let's just recap what we've done. We've got the project window. This is where we have everything, all our bins stored, and you can create new bins here and organize as you want. Inside our bin window, that's where our clips are stored. This allows us to bring things into our project. Probably for you, it's going to be using the source browser to bring things into your project. If you're using a different program, you'll have other ways to get your clips into your project. This is our composer window that lets us watch the raw footage, set in and out points, and edit it down into our timeline. This side of the composer window lets us watch what's on our timeline. That's called the sequence. Once we get things on the timeline, we can move them around using segment mode. We can edit in between clips using trim mode. And of course, whenever we're editing stuff from the composer window down to the timeline, we can either splice it or overwrite it. Splice will push things down. Overwrite will basically erase things where that clip is going. Okay, I know it's a lot, and I know some of these things that you see in my screen are not going to match with what you see on your screen, and if you're using a different editing system altogether, a lot of the terminology and functionality will look different, but the process is the same. Raw footage onto a timeline, trimming out the bad stuff, keeping the good, making sure edits work together. That's what we're doing with editing, just making sure we get everything that tells the story onto our timeline, and we cut out the things we don't need. Okay, so we're going to cut this lesson here. I'm going to save everything again just by hitting Control S, and the next time we get together for this lab, I'll talk to you about sound editing. That's it for lesson 1. I hope it wasn't too overwhelming for you. I know Avid can be a big program to kind of sift through, so hopefully you don't feel too intimidated by it, and just understand that yes, we will be able to get on this in the fall and learn more about it hands-on. So the next time we get together, I'll be teaching you about sound editing tools in Avid. See you next time.